Serious police officers of Reddit, what is the most sickening crime that someone has committed and show no remorse for? Police dispatcher here, currently working out of a county hospital. The amount of sexual assaults on kids too young to even understand is disgusting. Absolutely appalling. The hardest, I think, are the repeat domestic violence calls, where you've brought the same person in 5 times and the girlfriend/wife/husband doesn't press charges because they didn't mean it, until we get called back next week for another hole in the wall and broken bone. Honestly, I don't think average citizens can comprehend half the terrible stuff people in law enforcement see/hear. The one that sticks with the most was a 34-year-old man who had slit his wrists at a public park and called 911, not to save his own life, but so that we would know where to find his body, so kids didn't stumble across it. This guy was bleeding out on some rocks in the middle of the night and just sounded so calm, while I had officers trying to find him and M's en route. My officers had to tourniquet at this guy's arms with their belts and carry him to where the squad could safely collect him. Police get a bad rep, but I would love to see half the people who bitch on here and on my Facebook deal with half the situations my officers do every day. Edit. Holy crap, wasn't expecting this much response. This post and all my comments are solely based on my 5+ years dispatching at 3 separate departments. I don't pretend to speak for all of law enforcement, and I'm sorry so many of you have had negative experiences. With that said, I love my career and highly respect 99% of my officers. While everyone is entitled to their own opinions, please keep your BC_ND logic to yourself. Thank you for the interesting and good discussion and overwhelming support. You all rock. I'm an animal control officer for my county. I think the worst scene that I've gone out on was still what I went out on my first day as an ACO. For some context, it was an incredibly cold winter and us Illinoisans had just suffered a cold snap that dropped temperatures down overnight to over -30°F with wind chill. We got a call from a neighbor that was concerned because he could hear his neighbor's elderly husky yelping in the backyard. He couldn't see over the fences. It was some crazy high 8-foot tall privacy fence, higher than normal privacy fence. So this is my first day of field training. I head out with the other officer who is talking to me as we walk up to the property. He's going on about safety and procedure when approaching a residence. People are really happy to see us as they think we are there to take their dog. No one answers the front door, so we proceeded around back. The gate is unlocked, and we can hear the dog yelping now from out back, so we make entry into the backyard. What we see is something that is going to stick with me the rest of my life. The officer, who's been rattling the whole way, suddenly drops off mid-sentence and we are left with just the horribly whining noise from this elderly husky. The dog is frozen to the ground and blood is splattered everywhere like there was a damned massacre. We rush over to the side of the animal and attempt to calm it down enough to inspect its injuries. The dog had apparently become frozen to the ground overnight, and when he attempted to get up in the morning and had found himself unable to get up, we figured that he had been out there struggling and tearing his fur and flesh away from one side of his body bit by bit for a good few hours at that point. We are out there for about 20 minutes holding him down, while pouring warm water to free him from the ground before the owner finally comes out from the backyard. His first concern on coming out back and finding us trying to rescue his dog with half of his backyard covered in a cornucopia of crimson. Why the hell those fucking dog cops are on his property? Throughout the encounter with him, he showed minimal to no concern for the animal's welfare and seemed more interested in A, who had called the cops on him, B, why we were messing with his dog, C, why we were on his property. By the time we got the dog free, it had large patches of its body with missing bits of fur and flesh. Thankfully the cold had stopped most of the bleeding at that point. Before anyone asks, he was given a notice of apparent violation to get the dog immediately in for veterinary care. We ended up transporting the animal to a veterinarian for him to ensure he complied. He ended up opting to humanely euthanize the dog. It was 15 years old and in poor health before the injuries. We attempted to push charges for aggravated cruelty of an animal, a felony in my state, but the let it bounce down to a misdemeanor and eventually the judge just banned him from animal ownership for several years. We check religiously to ensure he has no other animals on his property. The jigsaw murder committed by Stephen Mars Hall. killed his landlord, and then dismembered and scattered his parts around UK countryside. His cuts were perfect due to his past in a gang where he regularly and to cut up bodies. Domestic abuse by a husband who lives primarily in another country cause he can't be a doctor in America while his family lives in a shitty townhouse in my precinct. Has mistresses and barely provides his wife and kids enough money to get by. Beat his wife and she takes it cause he took her out of Africa and she thinks it's her only option. I applied for a warrant for him while he was out of the country. She's so far gone that she got in touch with me to beg to rescind the warrant. She assured me that when he comes back she has escape plans in place in case he beats her again. Late to the party and a throwaway because of confidentiality, but I was a probation officer who wrote presentence reports on convicted felons prior to sentencing. The report is used by the judge in determining length of sentence. A major portion of the report is the defendant's version of the crime, why they committed it, and how they feel about it. I only wrote reports on major crime convictions, murder, rape, armed robbery, carjacking, etc. I've seen horrible things. Mother who put her child in a steaming hot bath because the 2-year-old peed on the floor. Man who cut off his roommate's head with an ashtray. Man who put a gun up a woman's vagina and pulled the trigger, etc., etc. I have written hundreds, probably thousands of these reports. Very few of these people show any true remorse. To feel remorse, you have to have empathy for others, and these people just don't. They are all very sorry, but, as I like to call it, they had situational remorse. They are sorry they got caught. They all go on and on about how hard their incarceration will be on the mother, their girlfriend/boyfriend, their kids, but none of them were thinking about their own mother, girlfriend/boyfriend or kids when they committed the outrageous act they did. They weren't thinking about the victim's mother, the victim's girlfriend/boyfriend, the victim's kids, or even the victim when they chose to end their lives. These people do not, generally, feel sorry for the crime. They feel sorry for themselves, that they got caught. I'll get off my soapbox now. I've seen too much depravity in this world. Interned at a district attorney's office during law school. Most of my work was on a case of a young man, early 20s I think, who murdered his twin brother, mother, and father with a samurai sword. I was involved in the matter during the stage to determine if he was fit to stand trial. He later wasn't. After I left the internship, criminal proceedings can take a long time. From some of the interview transcripts I read, guy was just completely insane/detached from reality. When I was going through MP school, our instructor told us about his worst case he had been involved in. A guy who recently came home from Iraq was arguing with his wife because he thought she cheated on him. She was in the shower and he was yelling at her through the curtain. Eventually the guy grabs her by the hair, smashes her head into the toilet till the seat broke, stabbed her to death with a shard of toilet seat, and proceeded to drag her out into the front yard to wait for the MPS to come and arrest him. When I was an investigator, I worked a case where the white boyfriend of a Mexican immigrant was babysitting her child from a previous relationship. The child was almost 3 years old and was crying. We later learned he had been abusing her for a while. When the mother wasn't around, he placed a phone book on her head and beat her. She died a few days after in IQ. Hard investigation too. Made the case and took it to grand jury. He was indicted and arrested the following day. After grand jury, in the jail awaiting trial, he wrote a complete confession to a member of a supremacy group claiming to have killed a mixed baby and they should accept him into their organization for his heroic actions. We found out about this and obtained the letter. Then got video footage from the jail showing him writing a letter. Circumstantial I know, but the letter was examined by a forensic document examiner and found to be his writing. He showed no remorse through the trial and laughed about it when he got found guilty. He didn't laugh when the jury handed down the death penalty. Lot of stuff I'm leaving out for obvious reasons. That one still bothers me. I work with juvenile offenders. The worst I can think of at the top of my head, a young girl shot her mom point blank range because she was tired of her mom allowing stepdad to continue raping her. No remorse. 14-year-old boy kills 4-year-old half-brother by beating him in face with bat. Worst part is that parents and CPS had been informed before incident that 14-year-old had it out for him, but parents were in such denial they were always defending him. Even after he killed 4-year-old. 14-year-old justifies it by saying he was jealous and it wasn't even his full-blood brother. Parents are still in denial. 16-year-old boy continuously rapes disabled grandfather until one day he gets caught. That's right, he was raping his own grandpa. 2 girls bully another girl to eat them out. When she refuses they begin to stick their vaginas in her face. She's still fighting, so they decide to beat her and rape her with a broomstick. The victim can no longer have children as they tore up her insides. None of these youth felt remorse. Something has to be wrong in your head for you to even get this far. Feelings of remorse are long vanished by then. The only remorse I see is usually when it's a crime committed with peers and peer pressure. And still sometimes they try to justify by saying they were just following the leader. These kids always have a horrible upbringing. It's a cycle. Worked as an EMT for a while. We were called on a drunk driving incident involving said drunk and a mother and her 3 children. Upon arriving at the scene, we knew the mother and her children were deceased, but we followed protocol. Unfortunately, we got stuck with the drunk who had 3 or 4 scratches and a lump on his forehead. I remember the paramedic working with me wanted to punch the guy so bad. He knew he had killed those kids, aged 5 and under, but all he cared about was that he got blood on his new pants. Former correctional officer, ran the segregation unit. The whole I had an inmate who was a regular. He was a serial rapist / killer of toddlers. He used a hunting knife inserted into their vaginal tract to, in his own words, open them up, and would rape them as they bled to death. Trying to avoid too many nightmarish details here, he not only felt no remorse, but spent most of his time in segregation or protective custody due to bragging about his crimes to other inmates because he thought it made him look cool or something. He really tested the limits of our duty and ability to keep him alive and well while in custody. I worked in a court in a jail in Texas. We saw the accused immediately after arrest to inform them of their rights and bond. They usually came in groups of 5 to 40. It averaged around 15. One man's probable cause affidavit told a story of him keeping a woman as a sex slave in a motel room for 2 weeks. He allegedly cut her skin and rubbed feces into the wounds to infect them. In court, the judge read his bond and charge in front of the other inmates. Because of the nature of jail culture, the judge tried to hide the sexual aspects of his crime. Instead of appreciating this, the defendant proclaimed it was consensual. We practice BDSM. The judge decided that he needed a reality check and read out the most interesting parts of the affidavit to the entire courtroom. He kept yelling, "She loves that. That's how we make love." Another time, the person didn't comment or proclaim innocence, but it was a similar story. The probable cause affidavit alleged he was homeless and splitting a motel room with a woman. He went on Craigslist to buy a printer. He bought an HP printer for $40 and came back to the room and proceeded to print counterfeit money. How he thought this would work escapes me. He then yelled at the woman that she must be a lesbian because she didn't want to have sex with him. So, he tied her up, injected her with meth, and raped her. Then he forced her to shower to remove any evidence. She stayed in the room for about 48 hours terrified of him. Finally, she got the courage to escape. When he was passed out, she called the police, and he got to see my smiling face. Bonus, I was forced out of that job for openly criticizing the violent actions of the local police department. Whenever someone says we need to abolish the police, I'll direct them to this thread. Shows like Law and Order, SVU, or the police who have been the first at grisly scenes like Sharon Tate's murder, or having to wheel out those barrels of human remains owned by Jeffrey Dahmer. Fuck, people don't understand that it's them who are trying to get to the bottom of these sick crimes, while trying not to crack under the knowledge of the insanity that people are willing or capable of committing, especially for those who have small children and constantly deal with cases of child abuse, murder, neglect, molestation, trafficking, all of that horrible shit. Correctional officer here. Too many to count, but I'll give a few brief stories. Guy murdered his girlfriend, raped her 8-year-old daughter on the bed next to mom's body while she stared into her lifeless eyes, Took 8-year-old on the road for a few months, keeping her chained in motel bathrooms, raping her, and forcing her to do cocaine. Also probably killed his sister and his child with his sister. Spends most of his time grieving stupid crap and acting superior. One guy molested a bunch of kids all over the country. Now spends a lot of time trying to coerce younger sex offenders into sex with him. During one investigation told me, like I said to that judge years ago, illegal according to who? Fucking everybody, dude. One guy murdered his entire family, told his grandma on the phone that if he ever got out he'd kill her too. As some earlier posters said, very few inmates have any real remorse for what they did. They're just sorry they got caught. Anyone capable of doing these things didn't have much empathy to begin with. Sometimes it is downright bizarre to see these guys who have raped and murdered children leading such normal lives. A child is dead, a family is shattered, and the person responsible is eating chips and watching TV, laughing with his buddies. Just weird.